Welcome to the Bullying Redirect podcast. My name is Frank DiLallo, and I am so glad you could join me today. I'm not telling you anything new. Cyberbullying is a huge problem with enormous implications, not only here in the US, but around the globe. For my family, cyberbullying hasn't been something that just happened at a distance to others somewhere out there. I'm incredibly sad to say cyberbullying has been an extremely disturbing and personal reality for our 15-year-old daughter. I've witnessed the aftermath of repeated instances of her being victimized online. As a father, it breaks my heart, and I feel tremendous hurt about these senseless and shockingly cruel acts and the huge impact this vitriol has had on my daughter and our family. Thankfully, during many family discussions, my wife and I were able to work through each incident and reframe them in such a way that has helped our daughter to grow stronger and more resilient. What makes me a proud papa is that although our daughter has been victimized online, she is choosing not to be a victim. She is rising above this and is crystal clear that these actions have nothing, absolutely nothing to do with her. I so admire her courage and strength and resourcefulness. I love you, kiddo, with all my heart. Because this has been an all too familiar topic for our family, is one of the reasons why I chose to make cyberbullying the first topic of this podcast. I didn't have to ponder. I immediately knew who to ask as my guest. I'm incredibly grateful to Dr. Samir Hindaja for being my first Bullying Redirect podcast guest. Samir and I met about 8 years ago. He introduced himself after a presentation I gave at a national conference in Houston. A couple of years later, I had a chance to meet him after a keynote address that he gave at the International Bullying Prevention Association conference in Denver. Samir has left a huge impression on me. He's smart, knowledgeable, and truly a well-respected expert in the field of cyberbullying. To go along with that, he is also one of the kindest and most caring individuals you would ever want to meet. Dr. Samir Hindaja is a professor in the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice at Florida Atlantic University, co-director of the Cyberbullying Research Center, and faculty associate at the Berkman Klein Center at Harvard University. He is recognized internationally for his groundbreaking work on the subjects of cyberbullying and safe social media use, concerns that have paralleled the exponential growth in online communication by young people. He has written 7 books, and his interdisciplinary research is widely published and cited in a number of peer-reviewed academic journals. As a keynote speaker, an expert on teens and social media use, Dr. Hindaja also trains students, educators, parents, mental health professionals, and other youth workers how to promote the positive use of technology. In addition, he is frequently asked to provide expert commentary by news organizations, and his work has been featured in venues that include CNN's Anderson Cooper 360, NPR's All Things Considered, the BBC, and the New York Times. He has received Auburn University's Global Anti-Bullying Hero Award, won Florida Atlantic University's Researcher of the Year Award, presented on cyberbullying at a congressional briefing on Capitol Hill, testified in front of the Attorney General and the Departments of Education, Health and Human Services, and Homeland Security, and served as a Fulbright specialist scholar at Dublin City University. Dr. Hindaja is also the co-founder and co-editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Bullying Prevention, a peer-reviewed journal from Springer. His website is cyberbullying.org, and you can follow him on Twitter at Hindaja. I am super excited to have him on the Bullying Redirect podcast. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Samir Hindaja. So welcome, Samir, to Bullying Redirect podcast. It's so good to have you here. So I not only want to learn from you today, I want to learn about you. So tell me about your story and what got you here and to be doing cyberbullying research and, your journey.
Thanks, Frank. I appreciate you having me. My journey's feels like a long one, but it's cool to see how everything comes together over time. I was interested in criminology and criminal justice while I was growing up, and I had a mind to become a law enforcement officer. But then as I worked through my undergraduate degree, I really discovered how much I loved learning. And so at the same time, my dad had a computer business. So I was involved in hardware and software and networking, and I loved learning about that as well. So as I discovered that, I didn't really want to be a law enforcement officer, but I did love studying, I did love learning. Maybe there was a way for me to intersect criminal justice with, technology, because I felt that this was going to be a bigger and bigger issue as we moved ahead in time. And so when I went to grad school in Michigan State, I was able to develop my degree program around criminal justice, but also computer science as well, and the sociology of science and technology, and really develop a strong foundation to be able to study a variety of cyber crimes. And when I was first starting out, after graduation, I was interested in a number of cyber crimes, and I have written research on identity theft and network security and information security, etc. But for whatever reason, the issue of online victimization has exploded. And when you think about online victimization, of course, that occurs in a number of forms, but I really gravitated towards, hey, youth are dealing with this. And of course, they're dealing with a lot of what we now call cyberbullying. And so cyberbullying is something that has exploded in relevance and importance to many stakeholders. Of course, parents, schools, politicians and legislators, celebrities care about it. Entire governments of countries care about it as well. And so over the last 15 or so years, we've been able to do a lot of really good work in that area. And we've also, from that point, studied other forms of youth technology misuse, such as sexting, such as sextortion, digital dating abuse, where you see power and control and passive aggressiveness demonstrated between, let's say, romantic partners, even at a young age. So I love what I do. I'm very, very thankful that God has opened up this this pathway for me, and I do feel like I'm making a difference on a daily basis. And you can't really ask for much more than that.
Mm-hmm. And when you say we, are you talking about co-author and colleague Justin Patchen?
Yeah, my co-author and colleague Justin Patchen is someone that I've known since graduate school, since our time in Michigan State, where we shared an office together. And his area was juvenile justice. And so there again, there was just a natural connection between, juveniles and youth and teens, and then, computer crime and victimization and criminal justice and law and prevention and response and identification and investigation. All of it sort of coalesced and allowed both of us to be able to study what we do now. And he's over at the University of Wisconsin, Eau Claire, and I'm at Florida Atlantic University.
At what point was there a defining moment? I mean, I heard some of your background and your dad's background too. He obviously had some influence with you. Was there a defining moment, or when you knew that you were encoded to do this?
Well,
This
I've
is
always
life's mission.
Sure, I've always been very, self-aware, and being self-aware from a very early age, you realize how difficult it is to grow up. You realize that adolescence has so many complexities and pressures and struggles. And so I was just keenly attuned to that in my own life. And I also saw so many people around me struggling in different ways. and coping both in positive and negative ways. So I think I've always had a heart for kids, and I work with them in the community and have always worked with them in the community, whether it's teaching Sunday school at church, or helping with the high school youth group, or doing community service projects like painting homes in underprivileged areas. So I've always cared deeply about youth. And so since I love technology and understanding that youth have completely embraced technology and social media, it just felt very natural for me to want to study this, and not just study it from an ivory tower at my university, but study it in ways where I'm able to get out on the front lines. And I go to schools regularly, and I give talks to students and parent groups and educators and mental health professionals and law enforcement, just to equip them, to empower them to work with youth and help them to make positive choices online.
Mhm. Well, certainly your website has a plethora of information and resource. Thank you for that, by the way. And I did read Bowling today, and what an incredible resource. And certainly it's helpful for all ages, but I hear your passion and affinity for youth, and that you really want to touch some lives, and that you are.
Yeah, and not just me and not just my colleague Justin, but there's so many really good people in this space, including you, who want to make a meaningful difference, care deeply about it, simply because you care about humanity, you care about our future generations. You're not just interested in building your own kingdom. And so I just want to give a shout out to everyone else who co-labors with us. Again, thank you for all your efforts. We're constantly raising awareness. We're constantly reaching people with the resources that they need, so that they just feel better about their situation and their ability to handle it. And we'll continue to do so.
Mhm. Would you say some more about the Cyberbullying Research Center, the genesis around that? And
Sure.
I mean, the reach is incredible with
Yeah, the
it.
Cyberbullying Research Center, if you just go to cyberbullying.org, you'll find a wealth of resources and research and best practices, and blogs about current events and issues in this space. We just felt that there was this tremendous need, and there wasn't some sort of one-stop shop repository for all of this sort of stuff. And so Justin and I thought to ourselves, hey, we should create it. And it is, to be honest, a lot of work to maintain a website and always keep it updated, and have downloadable PDFs for everyone, and always be on top of the latest developments when it relates to this social media company or this new device. But it pushes us to stay on top of it. So it's good. There's a little bit of accountability that the site has over us, which I appreciate. And, we're just constantly wanting to make sure that it's a very relevant, very accessible, very current resource. So again, I encourage everyone to check out cyberbullying.org. Everything's free, and there's so much there for everyone to explore.
You all are very, very generous with what you offer on that site. So let's talk about cyberbullying specifically. And what I got from your website is, it says, what is cyberbullying is one of the most frequent questions we are asked, you and Justin, because many know what it is when it happens, but have trouble wrapping succinct descriptive words around it. Formally, we define it as willful and repeated harm inflicted through the use of computers, cell phones, and other electronic devices. And this is from your other book, Bullying Beyond the Schoolyard, Preventing and Responding to Cyberbullying. So we developed this you all are saying that we developed this definition because it is simple, concise, and reasonably comprehensive. And it captures the most important elements. And those elements are willful. The behavior has to be deliberate, not accidental. It's repeated. Bullying reflects a pattern of behavior, not just one isolated incident. And harm is involved, so the target must perceive that harm was inflicted. And obviously, computers, cell phones, and other electronic devices are involved, and this is what differentiates it from cyberbullying from traditional forms of bullying. So go ahead.
I was just going to say that when individuals think about cyberbullying, we don't want them to get too caught up in the semantics of it. Yes, for sure, it has to be intentional. There has to be some measurable harm or articulable harm. We want the target to be able to say, yes, this has affected me emotionally or psychologically, et cetera, or maybe even relationally. It's got to be repeated. It can't just be a one-time event, because then we would largely define it as harassment. It has to be sort of like over and over again. They keep bothering you, they keep annoying you, they keep frustrating you, and they keep hurting you with their words. But big picture, it's just being a jerk using technology. And again, we just want to think about, what is the victim's perspective, the target's perspective. Mm-hmm. It doesn't really matter how I size up the situation. If I'm able to say, or if I try to say, hey, they were just joking around. I mean, you should be used to that, because there's so much, good-natured elbow ribbing that goes on amongst youth. Just, it's no big deal. But hey, it's not up to me to actually make that determination. It's up to the target. And if they tell me, this hurts me, this is affecting me, this is causing me pain in some capacity, then absolutely we all need to take that person at their word and treat it seriously.
Mm-hmm. So there has to be some thoughtful and mindful interviews, discussions, conversations with the youth that's feeling targeted around this. So is that usually, who does that? Is that school administrator, parent? I mean, who makes the determination about willful and, repeated, and the harm and all of that?
Yeah, typically it's the school, because the aggressors actually, for the most part, tend to be individuals that the target knows from school. So you might think about, something that's in the online realm, cyberbullying. You might think, hey, this is probably a lot of strangers just being, cruel to other random people online. But what we find with cyberbullying, especially amongst youth, no, it's actually someone that the target knows from school. So with that said, the school can then say, hey, there's this nexus between, what is happening online and the school, in that the target is now feeling, let's say, unsafe because they know the perpetrator from school. The target isn't able to focus in on learning, or isn't able to feel supported in this learning environment. And so for all these reasons, because again, we've identified a nexus with the school, it is imperative upon us to do the investigation. Mm-hmm. Because also an important point is that many youth, they may or they may not come to the school, because they worry, if I go to the school, will the school make a huge deal about this? Will I then be labeled as a tattletale or a rat? Will that set me up for additional victimization? Will they call my parents, and will my parents immediately take away my device? And I can't risk that. I need my phone. It's like oxygen to me. So we just have to understand that youth approach adults, whether it's at school or at home, with so much trepidation. And if we can understand that, hey, we need them to come to us so that we can begin the investigatory process, well, hopefully we're conveying to them over a long period of time that you can trust me. Give me a chance to come through for you. I will not freak out. I will not make this some sort of overblown affair. I will keep it on the down low. I will talk to you about what you would like to see happen in this situation. I will not make this, some sort of major story across the school campus. Just give me a chance to come through for you. So I hope that educators are doing that. I hope that they don't say, oh my goodness, this is cyberbullying. I'm going to immediately put my foot down and we're going to have an assembly and we're going to scare all the other students so they don't do that. No, I mean, that could be very counterproductive and detrimental. First thing would be to sit down with the target, maybe quote unquote bystanders or witnesses who might have seen this, let's say online. Maybe someone's taken screenshots. Maybe they can pipe up and say, yeah, I know who was involved. I know who did this. I know who egged them on. I know who shared it. I know who's continuing to target the individual, the victim, let's say. So all of that must be done, of course, by the school. And we hope there's open line of communications there.
Well, also what I learned from your book, Bullying Today, is that it's very rare that it's purely cyberbullying. That there's other traditional forms of bullying that can happen, do happen simultaneously, or as a part of that.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up. Not only is the aggressor primarily someone from school, but like you're alluding to, there's so much overlap. I think we found that it's around, in situations where there was school-based bullying, 80% or so of the time, there was also cyberbullying, and vice versa. So we just have that strong overlap, and it makes sense because if the aggressor is someone from school, well, presumably since everyone's online after school hours and weekends and summer break, winter break, they're going to go after you during those times as well. Similarly, if some sort of drama bubbles up on an online game or on a social media platform, because again, everyone pretty much knows each other because school is the community in which you're living and interacting and growing up in, well, it's going to continue at school when school resumes.
So have you seen any trends, any shifting in that with, this last year with the pandemic? I mean, most schools have gone to, well, we were quarantining for a period of time and then remote learning and hybrid. And now schools are all over the map with that, right? So have you noticed any trends, any shifting with that?
We haven't collected data yet on the influence of the pandemic. We're going to be collecting data immediately. So, continue to follow up with the Cyberbullying Research Center, and we'll be able to share that hopefully this summer. But the biggest shift that I can point out is having to do with youth, I think, struggling just more with isolation and loneliness, because believe it or not, the school actually was the first place they would turn to for help. But with everything being online, or let's say hybrid, you don't have that sort of open space for a student to walk into a counselor's office or for a student to chat with a teacher before or after class really, happens. And so we always need those open-ended times with students just in case they're prompted in that moment to speak up, to share something that's dear to their heart. But with the online realm, and we're all using these technologies to connect with students when they're in their homes, we don't really have those open spaces. It takes an intentional act for a counselor to specifically message or set up a one-on-one, let's say Zoom, with a student and say, hey, you've been on my heart. I just want to check in with you and see how things are going at home, with your grades, maybe with your peer relationships, maybe in the community if you're back to soccer practice, or online because we're spending so much of our time online these days in your favorite games and apps. But you can imagine counselors don't have the margin to have these one-on-one conversations with every student in a school. Teachers probably, they don't. They just, unfortunately, they don't. And that's sad because, again, a student is going to be very hesitant to message a teacher or message a counselor and say, hey, can we set up a one-on-one Zoom? They're not likely to do that. But again, if they were at school, they would be likely to have just a simple conversation. Just like when the teacher says, hey, how you doing? Just as an introductory greeting, they very well might pipe up and say, hey, I'm kind of struggling right now, but they're not going to do that in a group Zoom when you're covering some classroom material.
Connected to that, you touched on something that I think is key here and core, which is loneliness and isolation. And I'm wondering, I'd love to hear your take on, like you said, they're not willing to ask for help or say, I really need some time to talk and share my feelings and want to connect. They're doing it in a negative way and in a cruel way to try to make some connection, to break out of this loneliness and isolation. Would you agree with that?
I would. We've done research on motivations. Why would you cyberbully somebody else? It doesn't make sense. But way up there on the list, apart from jealousy, envy, insecurity, is dealing with my own struggles. And so, unfortunately, and maybe this is understandable, we should extend some grace towards them. Maybe they just haven't developed the positive coping skills or resiliency mechanisms that many adults have whenever they're dealing with some sort of social or relational conflict. I mean, if you're dealing with something at work, or I'm dealing with something with a coworker at the university, I'm old enough and mature enough to know that I can't just sort of like freak out on other people online or offline, and hurt them because I'm feeling very hurt and crushed or upset or angry. But again, youth, they haven't developed those skills yet, and for the most part, now some of them have, but mostly no. And so understanding that, I think what's so essential in this day and age is to be checking in with them on their well-being, on their mental health. We know without a doubt that they're absolutely struggling more, according to research, during COVID, as we try to move through this environment, this phase, because of the isolation, because of the loneliness, because they even see, because they're home all the time, how much their parents are stressed out about life. And typically their parents would have some alone time to work through things before the kids got home after school. but now everyone's together. Everyone's at least together more often. And so we just have a lot more conflict and stress and pressure. And I think it is undermining well-being. And I think that we have to continue to be very intentional about carving out more time during this very delicate season.
So it's incumbent upon us to reach out and to demonstrate, to model caring, compassion. You matter. You're important. How are you? I mean, interpersonal questions that show and demonstrate that we care about them.
And I think it's tricky because maybe you really don't have that with your teenager. And so if you try to start that right now, they're going to wonder, they're going to be all suspicious about your motives, but that shouldn't dissuade you from trying. Mm-hmm. So, give it a chance, try unique methods, take them to their favorite restaurant, just one-on-one, and have a quote unquote, daddy-daughter date night, or, whatever you want to call it, just to get them to open up a little bit. And of course, when you do, make sure you're not being judgmental or critical or casting any sort of blame, not just with your words, but with your body language, because we know our youth, they're so sensitive to that and they will pick up on that immediately and they will shut down. Another idea would be to, hey, is there a cool aunt or a cool uncle in your family who might have a better relationship with your son or daughter? Can you ask them to check in on your child and just spend some time with them? And maybe that'll give them an opportunity to voice what's on their heart. You never know, but we've got to be creative and we have to enlist as many people as we can as necessary to check in on our youth and make sure they're okay.
One of the things I really liked about your book, Bullying Today, was your chapter on ideas to make kindness go viral. And I really think that they need to see and have demonstrated for them how we, ideas and how we could go viral with kindness and compassion and caring. So I think it's really important here, the first paragraph or so that you have, it says one of the main points that Justin and I have been emphasizing in our school trainings and presentations is that we don't want students to do the wrong thing, i.e. not engage in bullying and cyberbullying. Rather, we want them to actively do the right thing, i.e. do their part in contributing, and the contribution, I think, is so important of a word, to be a kinder, better climate on their school campus and in their community. If I were still a student, and I love this, I appreciate you sharing this. If I were still a student, I wouldn't want to attend a school where the kids aren't mean to each other, but they are also not nice to each other. Instead, they just keep their heads down, mind their own business, and live their own lives in a very insular and self-focused way. That doesn't get me excited or hopeful about all my middle school or high school life, and makes me feel life or like everyone just needs to gut it out in survival mode and wish for better days on the other side of it. I want to go to a school where my fellow classmates and peers are invested in building and maintaining an environment marked by care, compassion, and mutual respect. Then I'd be stoked to get there in the morning and be a part of something healthy and vibrant, something that is thriving. I love that.
Yeah, so I mean, it's tricky because I would say it's very difficult for one student to think to themselves, I see a need here, for kindness, for positivity. Everyone seems really bummed out or just focused on themselves, and we really don't have great peer relationships. And so I'm going to come up with this idea. I'm going to come up with this unique strategy. For example, one girl, Caitlin Hack, came up with Positive Post-it Day at her high school, where she, I kid you not, she's got all these Post-it notes or these sticky notes, and she wrote down complimentary, encouraging things on all of them. And she stuck them on lockers all over the school. Wow. just to sort of brighten people's day. Now, she is a rare breed. Many students would think to themselves, okay, it seems like a good idea, but everyone's going to make fun of me. They're going to think I'm a goody two shoes or a suck up. It's going to be a disaster. But at least she took a chance. But most students are not like that. And so instead, what I think we need is for students to band together. It's so much easier doing things in a group where the group feels, hey, this is a noble endeavor. This is a cool attempt to improve the climate, improve the environment, improve the culture at our school. And so we're going to do it. So I think that, students need to work together. But not only that, it helps so much when we have an educator who is involved as well, just to serve as an accountability partner, just to be like, hey, what are you guys working on? And can I help? Can I reach out to local businesses to get donations to resource you? How can we support you in this endeavor? Because I'm so proud that you're not just focused about, your own life and getting good grades and getting into a good college. You're actually focused on making sure that we're all working together here in a great environment. So I want to be there for you. I want to help you. So we want that partnership between the educators and the students. And we want there to be this excitement about building connectedness, building belongingness, building school spirit, building morale. All of these things, I think, tie together, and they can make such a difference. And actually, according to the research, they do. The research has shown very clearly that when you enhance school climate or make it more positive, related to kindness, related to compassion, etc., you have higher academic achievement, you have lower truancy or better attendance, you have higher morale, not just amongst the students, but amongst the staff as well. And in our research, we found that when you increase or improve school climate, you have lower bullying, lower cyberbullying, and lower sexting, and lower behavioral problems overall. So I would say that when it comes to schools and what they can do, that should be number one on their agenda, improve the school climate. But it takes a village, as they say. We need all hands on deck.
Mm-hmm. So I know that a lot of your work looks at why do people do this? And I'm so baffled and struck and even sad about how obsessed not only youth, but adults seem with being cruel online. And, we have so many different social media platforms. And so why does that seem to be the precedent? And I mean, unless I'm missing something, I know that there's humanitarian, ways, and there is kindness out there. It just seems to be overshadowing the cruelty.
Yeah, I feel like we have to try to take a huge step back and understand everyone's personal situation. I don't think the vast majority of the individuals who are cruel online, I wouldn't say they're psychopaths or sociopaths or dealing with some sort of fundamental root issue. I think instead they are stressed out. I think there are bad models in popular culture and out there that they're sort of emulating, which is unfortunate. I think that they justify it and rationalize it in a number of ways. And I think, this sounds maybe a little bit idealistic, but I feel like they've lost their way in some degree when it comes to integrity and character and having a moral compass that just has lost value to them because they ascribe value to maybe other things that they perhaps think will satisfy them or give them the feeling that they're searching for when they're cruel to other people. So all that is very unfortunate. And you wonder if they ever take a moment to just really look in the mirror and say, am I becoming the type of person, or am I the type of person I would be proud for my daughter or son to turn into? Like really proud. Maybe a few of them would be yes, because they think to themselves, it seems like this world is all about power and money and prestige and status and influencers and followers and having a platform and getting people to pay attention to you. Well, that would be sad. And I think that in time they'll realize that doesn't fulfill and doesn't give them the feeling that they're desperately searching for. And so instead, I hope that, they are able to, get that feeling by realizing instead, what might be a little bit more important in terms of what provides an identity and what provides a security that doesn't sort of move with the times, doesn't shift with the culture, isn't mercurial, like a thermometer. You just wonder about those sorts of things.
So going back to going viral with kindness, is that the way to counteract this, is to continue to model and reach out and to demonstrate how to do this in a way that shows compassion to others?
Well, I think when individuals do some sort of kind or benevolent act and it does go viral, I think that needs to be shared with others, and I think that it can inspire them. But you always want to make sure that the other person's motive for doing something kind isn't the opportunity to go viral. We want their hearts to be implicated. We want their consciences to be implicated. We want them to honestly partially be broken inside when they see sadness, injustice, pain, whatever it is. And we want them to be compelled to action. And none of that should be, rooted in some desire to be recognized or celebrated or noticed for it. It should be rooted in the desire to make someone else's life better, because life is miserably difficult for all of us. So with that said, and thinking about adults and thinking about youth, well, let's talk about youth for a second. I think it comes back to empathy. We want to promote empathy, but so many youth, they grow up in a very protective bubble. And, they're in their middle-class lifestyle, and, they have their extracurricular activities, and they go to their school and they hang out with the same people all the time. And maybe they do a little bit of volunteering or community service just to sort of spice up their resume or application packet for admission to a college, but it isn't really part and parcel of their life. So what I would say is that, how are we cultivating intentionally empathy in the lives of our children, in our youth, by specifically putting them in situations where their heart could be softened or ideally broken? And a quick example, and I'll turn it back over to you for more thoughts, because I feel like I'm rambling just a bit, but I'm Indian, I'm Asian Indian. And so growing up, we would go to India because I wanted to see my grandparents, of course. And my parents wanted to see their parents. Well, growing up and going to India, I was faced with so much hardship with what I saw around me. For example, when we're in the car and we're driving on the roads, there's many children coming up to your window, motioning their hand to their mouth because they're hungry and just wanting you to give them a little bit of money so they can have a little bit of rice to eat. I saw deformity based on malnutrition, kids without limbs, kids without fingers, kids with facial deformities. And all of this broke my heart. And even to this day, I can close my eyes and picture them. And all of that has compelled me to action. And maybe as a parent, you're thinking, my goodness, I want my kids to enjoy their childhood. But I would say, okay, that's fine. But I personally want my kids to have their hearts broken by sadness so that they're compelled to action.
Oh, it does break my heart. So I'm thinking about thank you for sharing that, by the way. I'm thinking about the prevalence rates. From what I've read, the LGBTQ community seems to be high on the prevalence rates in terms of being targeted. Have you seen any trends or any shifting in that, during the pandemic at all, and where we're at now, or other groups that have been included in those prevalence rates? Do LGBTQ still remain high on the prevalence rates, or are there other groups that have been targeted?
Yeah, by and large, and this has been a recurrent phenomenon, and it's something that we are finding over and over again whenever we do our research. Those who are not in the majority group, they unfortunately get disproportionately victimized. And so that could be your sexual identity, your sexual orientation. It could be your religion. We've conducted research on religion, and as you might imagine, those who are Muslim, those who are Jewish, even sometimes those who are Hindu, they are bullied more often than those who belong to the majority group when it comes to religion. Race as well. We tend to see those who are not in the racial majority, they're bullied a little bit more often. Of course, that depends on the region of the country we're talking about. Some regions are, of course, more diverse than others. Others are less diverse and more homogeneous when it comes to the racial makeup. But for whatever reason, we have that sort of in-group versus out-group, or insider versus outsider mentality. And maybe, again, that's rooted in insecurity and wanting to belong to something. But of course, no one deserves to be targeted because of their identity in any capacity, ever. There's no justifiable reason for that.
Yeah, from what I've been seeing and reading in the news, there's been a lot of emphasis on the Asian population right now. Is that true in terms of cyberbullying that you've seen, or on social media as well?
We haven't seen that empirically, in the research when it comes to youth. And then, for example, Asians being targeted a little bit more often, again, looking at middle schoolers and high schoolers. But I will say that anecdotally, it seems to be the case. We have, unfortunately, with the COVID being branded an Asian virus, or, rooted or sourced over in the Far East. Unfortunately, that message has spread and been embraced by a lot of individuals who use it as justification to be cruel to this population of individuals, of humans who are just like us. who share the same hopes and dreams as us and who are no more, no less worthy than any of us either. So it's a very sad state of affairs. And I hope with the increased attention that many universities and workplaces are giving towards equity, diversity, and inclusion, we will see growth in this area, but maybe it's going to take another decade. You never really know.
This may not be a fair question because it's not one size fits all, but is there any one piece of advice that you'd have for school administrators, teachers, parents, students, kind of an overall umbrella message or piece of advice?
I think that we should, celebrate everyone's story. And I think that what brings us all together, for example, according to the works of Brene Brown, is our struggles, is, when we're vulnerable with each other, because then it's like, oh my goodness, you seem like you have it all together. You seem like you're so popular and everyone loves you, but you struggle with the exact same things that I struggle with. And so as a consequence, I want to get to know you and I want to care about you. And maybe if you heard about what's going on in my life, you would similarly be prompted to care about me. So are there creative ways, of course, with the permission and support of students being willing to share their story, are there creative ways for educators to get us to understand that everyone is fighting a hard battle and for us to celebrate each other's sort of struggles and adversities, not really specifically the struggles or the adversities, but the fact that we're all working to overcome them. Is there a way that we can promote and celebrate this resilient mindset that we're all trying to have? Because again, each of us are dealing with heavy stuff. And so we're more similar actually than it seems that we're different.
I don't remember the direct quote, but somebody said something to that effect about we shouldn't be anything less than kind to each other when we hear each other's stories and know that we all have struggles and have those vulnerabilities.
Yeah, and there's been research done where there's this one project called Secret Kindness Agents, and it's by a professor named Ferial Person in Chicago, in the Illinois area. But she enlists high schoolers to spend an entire week with this project. And so at the beginning of the week, you talk about, okay, we're all going to be secret kindness agents. We're going to adopt monikers or nicknames for each of ourselves. And then we're going to write down a list of maybe 15 to 20 specific acts of kindness that we can do across the campus. And they could be as simple as picking up trash or holding the door open for someone. They could be smiling at people when you see them. It could be, writing thank you letters to the staff in the lunchroom or cafeteria. It could be going to the sporting events of the girls' teams, because really very few people attend the girls' events, whereas everyone attends the boys' events. And we just want to show the girls that we care about their sports as well. So, you can make a list, but you also, when you make that list, you write down the pros, like what are the benefits of doing this, but also what are the threats or the concerns? For example, I might be made fun of. I might be called a goody two shoes or something like that. This could fail miserably, and it could be a lame endeavor to try to make a difference on my community. It could lead, people to just have this running joke or make a meme about me, et cetera, et cetera. So you're just well aware of the positives and the negatives, but then you commit during the week to do these 15 or 20 acts of kindness, whatever it is. And then at the end of the week, you write reflective statements or essays or 1 or 2 page papers. But what we're finding is that, and this is where it all comes together, Frank, some of the students, when they're writing up their little reflective essays, they say that, I was just always in my head, always thinking about myself. And because I spent this week thinking about opportunities to be a blessing to other people, demonstrate kindness, compassion, thoughtfulness, I'm a much happier person because I've taken my eyes off of my own life and my own situation, and I'm looking around. So I love the transformative effect that such a program and kindness in general has, not just on the people to whom the kindness is being done to, but on the person doing the kindness.
I really like that. How impactful, to immerse kids into, what you're talking about is moving them towards the pro-social skills. So it's not really anti-bullying or anti-cyberbullying, trying to move them away from or saying this is wrong, it's bad, don't do it. It's moving them toward the behaviors and actions that we want to see in them, in the school climate and in the world, right? So it's developing those pro-social skills.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I want to be a great, or let's say amazing human being. Frank, you want to be a great or amazing human being. And so you don't become an amazing human being by, like you alluded to earlier, just not doing all the wrong things. You become an amazing human being because, man, you're always sort of surveying the landscape and looking for ways to, come through for others, or be thoughtful, or be kind, or be sincere in a compliment, or with an encouraging word. And I know from my own experience, as I try to do that and be very intentional about that, whether it's with thank you cards or whether it's with, complimentary posts on social media, I'm feeling a lot better about my own life and my own situation and my impact in the world.
Yeah, you'd mentioned the student, the female student that did all the Post-it notes. My guess is that that comes very naturally for her, but that's not the case for everybody. And we need to learn that there is an alternative to behaving in a cruel way.
Yeah, and again, just taking your eyes off of yourself. And I often tell students when I give, talks or give assemblies within schools that, the motive, of course, should be you're doing this because you want to actually make a meaningful difference. You don't want to be noticed or recognized on social media for doing this. But to be honest, one of the positive byproducts of, let's say, you doing something kind or coming up with some sort of really cool initiative at your school is that you can write about that in your college application essays. And everyone will love to see, at least the college admissions evaluators, that you actually tried something. Like Teddy Roosevelt says, you were in the arena, attempting to do something good, attempting to do something noble and brave, instead of just sitting on the sidelines, kind of being a coward, to be honest, and just making commentary or just being a critic. So I want youth to demonstrate some sort of motivation and initiative to, again, get in the arena and just try something, try to improve somebody else's life. Figure out what it is that you care about. Yes, it could be, I want more kindness and less bullying at my school. But frankly, if that doesn't really float your boat, but you care about human trafficking, well, pour yourself into that issue. Get swept up in that. If you care about the homeless in your community, get swept up in that. If you care about clean water in different countries who don't have access to clean water right now, care about that. Just figure it out what it is that you deeply care about. Let other people know, including adults, and we will be so proud of you. We want to equip you and resource you and assist you in any way that we can, as long as it's genuine.
So if we shift here a little bit, I'd like to talk about laws. There's a lot of emphasis on cyberbullying laws and using that platform to make a difference at the federal, state, local level, even with ordinances. Do you see that as an effective approach? And if so, what laws exist now that have been helpful and are truly impactful in making a difference? And if not, are there laws that we can enact that would make a difference, or where are you at with the whole laws and cyberbullying at this point?
Yeah, that's a really good question. What I would first say is that according to our research, we did one study which was all about perceptual deterrence, meaning if a student perceives that they're going to be punished by various entities, for example, the school or parents or the law, which has the strongest deterrent effect. And believe it or not, school was actually the strongest deterrent effect. A student perceiving that they were going to be, let's say, punished by the school had the strongest effect in reducing their participation in bullying or cyberbullying.
More so than a law.
Pardon?
More so than a law.
Well, more so than the law. In fact, the law was actually the weakest deterrent effect. And to be honest, Frank, when you're thinking about it, it does make sense, because let's say that I'm a student in a high school and this person really annoys me and I really want to go off on them, whether it's in school on campus, I want to push them down and beat them up, or I want to call them names and make fun of them, or whether it's online, or I want to issue threats over social media or post humiliating photos or videos about them, etc. Well, in that moment, I feel this strong, temptation and desire to do that. I'm likely not going to stop, pause for a moment and say, wait a second, in my state, there has been this law which prohibits this behavior and which prescribes this specific penalty for it. I'm not going to do that because right now I'm wound up in my emotions. I want to act spontaneously. I want to feel better about how I'm feeling. I want to resolve this tension that I'm feeling. So I will just act out and I will not think about the law and I will not think about the police. I will just do it. So my point there is that those specific prohibitive laws, they have to be on the books because we always need to point to something as a formal policy at the state level, or let's say at the local level. But I don't feel like they have the deterrent power that many legislators and politicians think they will have. Now, you asked what sort of laws might actually make a difference. I'm a huge favor of laws that mandate that school districts do a lot of things. For example, there are some laws across our nation here in America where the states specifically require the schools to, for example, collect data about bullying and cyberbullying, and then consequently, we'll know every year whether things have gone up or gone down. Some states have laws which require school districts to have an anonymous reporting system, meaning that an anonymous reporting system provides students with the opportunity to speak up, again, anonymously, about them being bullied, about them knowing somebody else who's being bullied or cyberbullied, just to keep the school in the know. And by the way, anonymous reporting systems are such a great idea. I commend them to every school district. We have some states which have specific laws which require school districts to have all sorts of school climate programming. I mentioned about, what is the school doing to promote connectedness and belongingness and peer respect and school spirit and morale? Well, there's specific initiatives that can be done within schools, and I love that states are mandating schools to do this. It matters so much. I mentioned about the research about that. So those are the laws that I think will actually make a much bigger difference than specifically setting penalties and prohibiting the behaviors.
So that makes sense. Mandating best practices, essentially.
Yeah, mandating best practices in prevention and response.
So do you have politicians and legislators asking you, what works and what doesn't, and what's important here?
Absolutely. The Department of Education, Department of Human Health and Services, Department of Homeland Security, even, I've spoken before them, and I've given them examples and ideas related to school climate, as well as some of the other things that we've studied. And I've also worked with a number of states. So to be, very honest, states have their ears open and they want to learn about this sort of stuff, but then it's up to them. Do we want to codify this in a formal policy? Are we really faithful in getting this out to all school districts? And perhaps the biggest question is, not only are we telling school districts that they must do this, are we equipping them with the monies, with the resources, with the personnel, for example, new hires, to be able to do this? Because it's one thing to tell them, do this, we're requiring it. And it's another thing to say, hey, we're actually going to give you all these resources so you can make it happen, because it's for our future, it's for our students.
Well, I'm so glad they're asking you instead of determining from a knee-jerk reaction what they think should happen in terms of the penalties and all of that. So
I believe on the radar of educators and politicians and legislators is increasingly the mental health and well-being of students and youth. I truly believe that they're aware of that. And so my hope is that it translates into hundreds of millions of dollars being spread across the nation to specifically assist and resource communities.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about a bit deeper here about the spiritual implications of the cyber world. And so it may even be beyond cyberbullying, but there's got to be an upside to this and also a downside, right? Like there is to everything. So what spiritual implications do you see in all of this in terms of our relationships and our families and how we connect and interact with each other?
Yeah, the biggest concern that I have is that I don't want us to move in the direction increasingly where we're a society that just shrugs off meanness or biting sarcasm, because that it might be funny in some contexts, but for the most part we always want to be thinking about the target. Let's try to be sensitive to them and their story and their background and their experiences, because we don't know what they're super sensitive about, just like you don't know what I'm super sensitive about. And if you found that out, and if you were really cruel, you could push those buttons and I could be devastated. But we want to move in a direction where we're not looking for angles or ways to really upset other people because we think that will allow us to get ahead. Instead, we're looking for ways to support them because we do realize that everyone is mired in various difficulties and stresses and pressures. So mostly for me, it's a mentality, and it's a mentality that's taking our eyes off of building our own kingdom and doing what's best for us, And really, I think building God's kingdom, doing things that are a benefit for his people, for all of his sons and daughters out there. So, that's my hope. I think that honestly, we're fighting the tide right now. We're not moving in a great direction. And so hopefully, individuals with various sorts of platforms will rise up and they'll continue to speak up about what's necessary in this day and age. And maybe with some of the movements over the last year and a half, let's say Me Too and Black Lives Matter, we might be making more and more progress. I just don't want it to be a flash in the pan. I want it to lead to long-standing change in the actions, in the attitudes of everyone.
Mm-hmm. I'm trying to understand, the difference between, not taking away somebody's freedom of speech and where it crosses the line, though. That's concerning to me, about where do you draw the line, and where do you respect somebody's freedom of speech, and where does it cross the line that we've got to pay attention to this.
Yeah, and I think that's such a good question, but I also think we're never going to be able to articulate in a document or in a research paper, what that line is. And so for me, what it comes down to, as I try to raise my own children, is, that whole moral compass, because I truly believe every single person, whether they walk closely with God or whether they walk far away from God, as long as they're not a sociopath or a psychopath, but the vast majority of people, I feel that whenever they do something wrong, if they stop and think about it, they have some sort of check inside of themselves. They have a lack of peace. They have, let's say, a still small voice giving them a bit of a yucky feeling about it. They have something that is happening internally. And if they listen to that, then that will guide and constrain their behaviors and keep them from doing something hurtful towards somebody else. But if they ignore it, and if they ignore it repeatedly, well, then their conscience will be seared, their hearts will be hardened, they will become stiff-necked, and they will just continue to do it. So my hope is, again, as I work with not just my own children, but youth across the nation, how can we cultivate that sensitive spirit, sensitive heart, sensitive conscience? Because that is really what is going to guide them on the straight and narrow, because that's what they need. If it's all about them being sort of guided and constrained because other people are looking over their shoulder, or, hey, what will this person think about what they did, or that person think about what they did? I mean, I think all that is justifiable. But if it's inside of themselves guiding them, then I think, okay, this is moving in the right direction. This is you shaping up to be that amazing human being, which we believe in you about, which we see the potential that you could be.
It's constantly building empathy.
Yeah, constantly having their heart pricked by things that are sad, by injustice, because in their own life, they want, I hope, justice. They want things to turn out right, and they want things to be fair. So when they see another person being mistreated, hopefully over time, they'll realize, wait a second, this is unfair. They're being targeted because of their identity, or because of the way they look, or because of a silly thing they said. And that's just totally unfair. And so my desire for justice trumps everything. And so for that reason, I will defend them. I will support them. I will encourage them. And I will never participate in the same cruel behaviors towards other people.
Mm-hmm.
That's the hope.
It's a beautiful hope. It's an important hope. And so as a, looking to the future, this is a constant battle. I understand. Do you have any, forecasts the next 5 years? Is there any hope in this?
I believe that more and more individuals are caring about bullying and cyberbullying, which is great. And by individuals, I also mean entities such as definitely social media companies, definitely corporations. More and more individuals understand that this is a pressing need in our community, something to address. So my hope is that we are able to put more resources into social emotional learning, conflict resolution, anger management, those sorts of issues which seem to undergird harassment and bullying and cyberbullying. And I feel like as we devote more resources to targeting those root issues from a very early age, and I truly mean even at the age of toddlers, then as those youth grow up, my hope is that they'll make better choices because something will be different about them. And then I think we'll hopefully also be able to teach them, what is acceptable in terms of a rationalization or a justification, and what is not acceptable, because even though we moved into a world where everything seems very relativistic, I hope that we can get back into a world where things are more black and white, frankly, in terms of, okay, this is right and this is wrong. And when you're hurting someone, it's always wrong. No matter what you think, it's always just fundamentally wrong. It's just a truth. It's not based on how you feel, it's a truth.
Well, and I want to thank you and Justin too for putting yourselves out there to train key people, in these skills that are so lagging, in our youth. The conflict resolution skills, the social and emotional learning skills, all of those.
There's so many individuals who are doing really great work, and I encourage your listeners to reach out to me, and I can direct them to those specific people and even curricula that's available to implement in schools and in after-school programs. And for all the parents who might be struggling with, I don't know what to do, or I don't understand this app, or how am I supposed to have conversations with my kid? Well, we have all those resources. Don't feel like you need to reinvent the wheel or exhaust yourself looking for them online. We know what's the best out there. We know what's quality and we know what's lame. So, reach out for help. We're here to assist. And there's so many other people. I know, Frank, you're also very willing to assist anyone who reaches out as well. We're going to continue to be partners in this and continue to have an impact.
Well, I'm grateful for your accessibility and being the resource that you are. So I want to get to these inspirational share questions. Are you ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
So from what or from whom do you get daily inspiration?
From what or from whom do I get daily inspiration? I think honestly, my family is a big deal because I waited a very long time. I was single for a very, very long time before God put someone in my life. And that is such a blessing because I know many people and I want to be sensitive to them. I feel their pain. It's so hard being alone. It's so hard being lonely. And so since God has given me someone to spend my life with, and I pray that for everyone who's wanting that, I just want to honor him and I just want to honor my family and I want to do them proud. I want to always make sure that at the end of my life, they're able to say that, man, he poured himself out for his family and he wasn't interested in, professional success. He was interested in, family success, the health and well-being of his family. So just looking at them, that always reminds me on a daily basis of what I need to focus in on.
Nice. So what one routine or ritual do you do daily that inspires and motivates you for the day? And if for any reason you didn't do that one thing, it leaves you feeling out of sorts or off balance or maybe even a little grumpy.
I think it's my quiet time with the Lord every morning. I have little kids, as I mentioned, and they get up relatively early. So this unfortunately forces me some time to get up at 4 or 5 and just grab my hot tea and sit on the couch and have my devotional and just spend time with God. Not just sort of consuming information, but just trying to hear from him. What does he have to say to me? And he does settle my heart. He does give me a peace about what the future holds. He does sort of allay the concerns I have for the day. But then when I don't wake up, or let's say it's a rough morning and I don't get to it, I do feel out of sorts. And so that's kind of my anchor. That's kind of what I use to ground me every single day. And I know a lot of other people benefit from that same practice as well.
How about one fun thing that you like to do that recharges your batteries and keeps this train moving with the Cyberbullying Research Center?
What really recharges my batteries is watching my favorite sports teams. I know that sounds so basic and maybe even a little bit lame, but I grew up in Missouri. And so I love for baseball, the St. Louis Cardinals. And for football, I love the Kansas City Chiefs because, again, they're in Missouri. For hockey, I love the St. Louis Blues. And so I follow those teams, I'll say religiously. I care deeply about the team's success, not necessarily any player success, but the team's success, because they represent my home state. They represent my hometown. And it just allows me to decompress when I watch my teams.
Nice. So is there one poem, book, song, or quote that keeps you balanced and grounded?
That's a really great question. I think the book that has always helped me over the years, and it came out in the early 2000s, was a book called Wild at Heart by John Eldredge. And it's all about authentic masculinity. And I know that, masculinity, that word, just the definition of it is kind of controversial because we have toxic masculinity. We have people who abuse masculinity. But that specific book by John Eldridge, again, Wild at Heart, it talks about authentic masculinity, which is about serving others, which is about having a higher calling, which is about not getting caught up in stupid worldly stuff that doesn't really matter and that you're not going to be thinking about on your deathbed. That book I try to read every single year. So, we're coming up on 20 years or so with me reading it every year, just as a reminder about how I want to live and how I want to be.
So what is the best piece of advice given to you or modeled for you that you frequently and freely would want to pass on or do pass on to others?
I think I really like the phrase don't sweat the small stuff, because we get so caught up in a lot of things, and some of them do seem very heavy, and no discounting that, no trivializing that. I absolutely understand that. But there's a lot of things that we get wound up about which really don't matter. For example, the way that our spouse puts the dishes in the dishwasher, or the fact that my kid every single meal makes a huge mess on the floor. And it's easy for me to get wound up about that because I am exhausted and I have to change things or do things differently or clean up after my little ones. But it's such a small thing when you consider all of the good things that we do have in our life, whether it's, let's say, our health, whether it's the fact that we're able to look at beautiful trees outside our window, the fact that we have family, or let's say parents or grandparents, if that's your situation as well. The fact that good things are around the corner. I constantly and firmly believe that. So I think don't sweat the small stuff has mattered a lot to me, and it's a constant reminder. Maybe because I am very intense, it helps me on a daily basis, and it's what I pass on to others as well. Because truly, I'm always thinking about my mortality. I'm always thinking about my deathbed and what's really going to matter at that time. And it helps me to put things in the right perspective.
What is one positive takeaway you've learned from your work, family, or life would you like to pass on to others to help them feel inspired and hopeful?
I think what I have learned is that Joyce Meyer wrote a book called The Battlefield of the Mind. And there's so much that's in our mind, which we might not really be aware of. And the recording that's playing on repeat, in our mind over and over again, hundreds, thousands, maybe even millions of times over the course of a lifetime, that absolutely dictates what our future is going to be like, what our present is like. And so I just encourage everyone to evaluate those recordings that are in our mind, that play in our conscience. And if they're unhealthy, if they're not really helping you and serving you, if they're not positive and faith-filled and hope-filled, then you've got to figure out a way to erase them, to burn them, so to speak. And you need to replace them with recordings that are in your mind, which again, repeat subconsciously hundreds of thousands, millions of times over the course of a life, that are positive, that are hope-filled, that are encouraging about the future.
Samir, thank you so much for this time, my friend. I'm so grateful that you were willing to have this conversation and join me on the Bullying Redirect podcast.
It's my pleasure. I greatly appreciate all the work that you're doing to raise awareness, to get people on board with this issue, and we'll just continue to make progress. So thank you again.
Yeah, can we do this again sometime?
Absolutely.
I love it. Thank you. Have a blessed day.
You as well.
Thank you. I learned so much today from Samir, and I hope you did too. To recap, a number of things that Samir touched on really resonated with me very deeply. So number one, any individual, and this is something that Samir had said, so I'm quoting him, any individual or group that is not in the majority is disproportionately targeted and victimized online. I'm going to repeat that. Any individual or group that is not in the majority is disproportionately targeted and victimized online. And I think this is true for traditional forms of bullying as well. Number two, in his research, when asked what their motivation is for cyberbullying. Students report having difficulty dealing with their problems. This, I believe, is further confirmation that youth are lagging in social emotional development and need our help in building pro-social skills. Number 3, school policies and school personnel have more power to deter cyberbullying than any local, state, or federal laws. And I would include, I'm going to add my own piece here, that I believe that parents as a deterrent have to rank up there as well. Number 4, Samir referenced, and I totally agree with him, that isolation and loneliness is a core issue for cyberbullying. I think isolation and loneliness is more prevalent than we know, which strongly indicates how much youth are struggling. I want to encourage listeners to view all misconduct and mistreatment by youth, including cyberbullying, as a red flag, and to have compassion for youth, knowing that their behavior signals some underlying cause, some underlying issue or issues, be it isolation and loneliness, dysfunctional family problems, psychosocial emotional problems, the list goes on and on. Kids are dealing with a lot of stuff, and many feel alone in handling and figuring out how to handle these struggles. And as prickly as they can be sometimes, and you know what I'm talking about, it is critical that as adults we reach out to them and at least let youth know that we are there for them. Number 5, conducting a cyberbullying study with youth during this pandemic would have been extremely challenging. However, Samir does indicate in the podcast that anecdotally, there is evidence to suggest the incidence of cyberbullying has increased during the pandemic as a direct result of increased online usage due to remote work and online learning. Lastly, number 6, do everything we can to encourage and model going virtual with kindness. I would highly encourage you to visit cyberbullying.org. You could be on this site for days. All the free resources and helpful information it has to offer. Please, cyberbullying.org, go on it and check it out. I am so grateful to Dr. Samir Hindaja for joining me on the Bullying Redirect podcast today, and for his kind and generous spirit and all his diligent work to reduce the incidence of bullying, cyberbullying, and the harm that cyberbullying can do. You can find Samir's books wherever you buy books online. And a special thank you to all of you for joining me on this podcast. I hope it was helpful. I hope you gained insights about cyberbullying and enjoyed the program, Bullying Redirect podcast. Be well, stay well, and God bless.
And this river of life, it's no lie today. It's that feeling inside of everything, the truth it brings. Free your mind.